Welcome to another episode of the weekly FreudenFreude live stream, where Sandra and I are going to bring you content to make you grow as a person and as a leader.
Hi, I'm Sandra.
I am Claudia. We are coaches.
We are coaches.
We are coaches, exactly.
For neurodiverse professionals, expatriates, and executives.
Yeah, and I work with corporate leaders, entrepreneurs, as well as their teams in tech and beyond. So we have been talking a lot lately about all the various things ultimately that deal around growth. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So today we selected the topic of growing and growing apart. Growing and growing apart. Mm-hmm. What made you kind of feel some affinity for this topic, Sandra?
I think so many things, Claudia, came to my mind when I was, talking with my friends when you and I talk. And when I see the journey that clients and that I myself have experienced in this past year, not even 4, 5, or 10, just in this past year in 2022 that just passed. I've noticed so much how we grow as human beings, and being human being, you're talking about changes that happen to you as a person, with yourself, with others, with your partners at work, friendship, with your knowledge, with your cultural understanding, in so many ways, bottom line, in so many ways. And one of the things, and I'm going to have to quote here Chaba Toth, I remember that in his book, he says that he lost friends along the way in his process of growing as a person. And although he regrets it, he wishes also that he could have done things differently if he would have had the knowledge that he has now, right? If he could, like a lot of us wish that we could make time go back and do things differently and better. But to be honest, I think that you can't. I don't think you can.
And sometimes it's not, sometimes it's worth it, and sometimes yes. It's not, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's, sometimes there's casualties as you go along your journey of life, right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, as coaches, we see sometimes truly fundamental changes in people. All of a sudden you have a different vision of who you want to be and how you want to lead your life and where you want to end up in. Yes. And, you move from maybe something that is very problem-centric into something that is opportunity-based and strength-based and solution-focused. And guess what? Sometimes you have people with whom you click because misery loves company. Right? I mean, let's say it how it is. Sometimes the bond that you have with certain acquaintances, friends, or whatever, people in your life, is because you were kind of experiencing or reacting similarly to something. And very often it's this misery kind of thing, right? We're both not happy at work, so now let's go and have a beer in the evening and bitch and moan about our bosses, right? I mean, it's things like that. All of a sudden, if one of these people changes jobs, it doesn't even need to be a mindset change, but let's just say a area of growth. They take on a much more empowering position in the same company or another company, and all of a sudden they're in this growth phase, in this happy, proactive phase and things like that. All of a sudden there's no need anymore to bitch and moan about the boss, because now maybe they are the boss, Yeah.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden you lose this connection that you had before, and you start, like the title of our episode is, you start to grow apart, because all of a sudden you sit at the same table still having the same beer, but you feel this kind of disconnect from the other things. You remember, you might feel empathetic against them, but you're not really part of that clique anymore, really.
Yes, exactly. I was thinking, I have many examples in my mind that I can think of, but I think one of them, let's say in the expatriate world that you and I have been part of and are part of, when I think about this example, let me put it very simple. When you're part of the expat community, you're in a normal place, you're back at home, you're a normal person, you're the normal Jane and Joe, right? You're just a normal human. But when you take an expat assignment, your mind expands, your senses, you become more aware of the world. The world suddenly, from being this, becomes this big, right? And you experience life in so many different ways. You start traveling, you start understanding, start experiencing, you start tasting, you start enjoying. And suddenly, when you go back home, you don't see people the same way. And it's not that you feel better. I really truly don't feel that it's that you feel better. It's just that even your conversations become different.
Mm.
You are now wanting to feel and find somebody else that has that connection about what it is X, Y, and Z place, or how aware they've become as well about the world and what other places they would like to go to, and so on and so on and so on. And so now the people yourself surrounded with in the past, let's say your college friends, your neighbors, your best friends back at home, they no longer have this thing that can teach you. If it makes sense, like before you would have conversations with your friends to exchange, to give yourself advice, and so on and so on. Now you have conversations with them just to hear them, but it's no longer that fulfilling conversation. So you feel and notice that change, and even your friends notice and feel that change, right?
Yeah.
And so now you're experiencing a loss where change is great.
Yeah.
For a lot of people.
And we not all the examples are that only you, let's say, go and grow.
Mm-hmm.
The other people might also grow.
Exactly.
Yeah, but they grow in a different direction. Imagine
Exactly.
you have your high school friends, let's say,
Yep.
and everybody goes and studies in different countries at different universities, different subjects. They have different kind of partners in their life, and so on. And everybody goes down a different path, and you're not as connected anymore necessarily as you were when you graduated high school, where you had this common bond. And I think that is this common shared experience that is new and fresh, rather than just something we reminisce about. Of course, you can still get together in a reunion with these people and reminisce and be absolutely happy and have great and meaningful conversations. On the other hand, you have grown apart. It's not exactly the same thing anymore, right? And again, we mentioned two cases here now of people going maybe abroad, spending time abroad, time changing a lot things changing a lot over time, let's say it like that. And that can still be kind of understandable to some people. Okay, they have been gone for 4 years or whatever, and now they're slightly different. Okay, so yeah, what is sometimes very shocking to people's environment is if they, for instance, start coaching and they come to very deep-rooted realizations and they change some mindsets and thinking and set different priorities and things like that. So sometimes you can have people change quite drastically in a matter of weeks or even days. I mean, I have seen people, after an intensive afternoon of intensive coaching, not working out the same person that they were when they walked in. Yeah. And fundamental aha moments and fundamental shifts in energy. Well, guess what? It's gonna throw a curveball into some of the relationships unless they're very careful and they're very in tune. But very often people are then, just enthusiastic and want to get started. And it's something that that is always something I think that we should help them understand that it's all great, but it will have an impact of what us coaches call the ecology, meaning the wider ecosystem in which we live, our family, our personal acquaintances or friends, our social circle, work, and so on, and it's like keep that in mind too, not to be too abrupt in your changes and thread lightly, which doesn't mean don't change. It's just like be a little bit more gentle about the transition, also sometimes for other people's sake.
Yes, speaking of that, that's good that you mentioned that about people's sake. I think mostly it's for your own sake, and this, hear me out. A lot of the problems, a lot of the issues with miscommunication is because there's a misunderstanding, right? And it usually is because somebody thinks that the other person feels that they are better some way, somehow, either because they know more about a certain subject or because they gave an opinion about something that they knew, and an unrequested opinion, that would be. And so when somebody talks about something, and this conversation where the other person is like, oh, here he goes, or here she comes with her opinions, with her ideas, this and that. And they feel that you are believing that you are better. Standings can happen in many other ways, in many other areas, but this is the one that I'm choosing to talk about because it has been my personal experience within my family, where even being quiet versus, oh, a mosquito, versus being quiet, versus the person that I was before, which I was loud and, I would laugh about everything. I would joke about everything. I was just everywhere. And as soon as I started learning about coaching, training, practicing, and then starting having the clients and so on, I changed. I started understanding that I now had a responsibility about being aware of the things that I say and how I say them for the sake of others and myself, because I realized how important the responsibility of your words have and how you can make somebody separate from you because either you said something wrong and you didn't realize, you didn't measure your words, you were not careful, or you can rebuild that bond. Okay, that's how I feel sometimes, that how you grow, like you say, has to be with a lot of caution. You cannot just go around believing that you now have better knowledge than the other person and throwing it at their face. I feel that a lot of people feel that way. Not that you want to do that, but they feel that way. And that's one of the biggest scares of expats, at least from the expats that I've also trained. Their biggest concern is, how do I reconnect with my family? They now feel that I am better because now I'm an expat. And unfortunately, and you can agree with me in certain ways, or tell me if you're different in this aspect, but a lot of people that become expats, it's kind of like an elite status in companies. With your friends, they're like, oh, now you're an expat, now you have all this kind of stuff, so you become different, and the growth is no longer just as a person, but now it's also like a competition. That's how I feel. What
That's
do you
very
think?
interesting, because that I do not have that experience whatsoever.
Oh, okay.
That it kind of that fact that you have done that kind of puts you in a different class, or like you said.
Okay.
For me it was, and maybe it does, but it never entered my consciousness anyway.
Okay. Okay.
I think maybe it I mean, if when I graduated high school, I had to go abroad to go to university, because back then we didn't have university in Luxembourg. Now we have a big university, a well-established university, but back in the day, and yes, I'm dating myself, we didn't have that. And so there was no choice but to go abroad. Okay, so my first step was not very abroad. You took the car and drove down to France. I studied in Lyon, my first stop, and so it was just, for me, that would qualify as expat, but it was just a university in the environment, right? Of course, that changed when I then went across the big pond to America, and stayed there for quite a while. And now coming back, I really don't know. And maybe it's because here in the center of Europe, there's so much movement. There's so many expats. Luxembourg is nearly half expats of some form or another. It's nothing special. So I do not have any personal experience with that.
Okay.
But I can imagine that in certain areas, it could then become, well, I'm more expat than you, right?
Yes.
and so that adds then an additional burden. And this is definitely a thing, because for me, one of the experiences that I had as an expat, having been gone essentially for the better part of 22 years from Luxembourg, is that you do come back, and you come back to an area where you grew up in, your hometown, literally your hometown, and you don't know anybody anymore. Really, because people have grown up in their own ways, done their own professional careers, had their own families. The kids are grown up, and they are in social circles and stuff like that you are not necessarily getting in again, even though you're back, right? So this is a very valid concern of expats, that as you go through his experience, whether the entail growth or not remains to be seen. But as you go through this expat experience, there are definitely links that are being broken. And the longer the expat lasts, the longer you were gone, the more disconnected you are. And for me, it was, coming back to this tiny country, speaking the language, having the passport from here, being a native from here, but it being absolutely the same as if I had moved to a country I'd never been in. Yeah,
yes.
there's no more common understanding. I mean, you drive down the street, you do not recognize the streets anymore, because everything has changed. So it is definitely, and essentially you grow apart from your environment even, and the landmarks and the way things are done and so on. Like, for instance, when I was a kid growing up here, there was not that much emphasis being put on Luxembourgish, which is my native language. So we would talk in Luxembourgish, of course, but let's say that a sign in a store would be in German or French. Okay. Because Luxembourg wasn't really all that written. But now you see signs in Luxembourgish. People write messages in WhatsApp or something like that in Luxembourgish. Where when I grew up, they might have written them in German because we all learned to read and write in German back then. Right?
Okay.
So, but even just that, how would you know that when you have been gone for 20-something years?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, what? You write this in Luxembourgish now? Yeah, it's like coming to a different country, and it's and of course it's I left after high school, so having a high schooler's understanding of the world, and then having a middle-aged understanding of the world is very different as well, right? So that plays into it. But maybe apart from this rather extravagant experience of being an expat, where you grow and you go a distance and you get new understandings, let's maybe look at something a little bit closer to home. And these were discussions that I have had with people. That you're a married couple. You're a married couple. And this happens, or this in cases where I have discussed this with, was where people really, or one person, let's say the woman for sake of just discussion here, the wife starts getting heavily into self-improvement, very heavily into personal development, and so on, and really starts to change. Her outlook starts to change. Her desires, preferences, goals, visions for life, and things like that start to change.
Mm-hmm.
And the husband might be, like so many husbands do, I'm generalizing, but so many do, they stay on their even keel doing their thing, right? Let's assume that that's happening here. And so it's going to go like that, right? I mean, they are going to grow apart unless
I'm waiting for that one.
There is understanding and mindfulness that this might happen, and that there's a desire to keep this connection, and that there's this awareness of commonalities that still exist. Because even though you change, and maybe fundamentally change, there's things that attracted you to your thing. There's shared experiences. There's there were choices that were made in the past, and a lived life that has connected you, and you should not, in the newness of the change and the growth that you're experiencing, kind of discount that. I think it requires conscious effort to keep this bond alive, and to accept that maybe your partner is not evolving the same way that you feel yourself evolving, and still love him just the same. Right? So yes, there is in some instances there's a distance, but yeah, keep it together, really. Like keep the relationship going, and it's work. And I think that especially in this enthusiastic initial phases of change, that might be a challenge or might get overlooked. And another aspect of that, which I think people should be mindful of, is not to push your new changes onto your partner. Yeah, like because it's like, I have because then it's not, I have a different way of doing things now, but I have a so much better way of doing things now and thinking, and you should too. And if you love me, you will. And it's hornet's nest, people, hornet's nest. Okay, let's tread lightly here, because you cannot push change on other people. Doesn't work unless they come willingly because you lead by example, and they want to explore something. Don't try it. I have been together with my husband for 30 years. We've been married for over 22. It doesn't work. I have tried. It doesn't work.
Yes,
you cannot
correct.
change people.
Correct. You made me think of something that I would like for people, when sharing it, let's put it that way, or at least what I would like to share with you, is that I've realized that people there's going to always, you're going to go through stages. There's going to be stages when you're going to be this tight. There's going to be stages when you're going to grow apart. Then there's stages when you're going to come back, right? And it's the most normal thing. The secret for me was to realize why we were at that moment apart and how to resolve it. Because you have to for me, it was like remembering what brought us together, and that was conversation. When I was back in Houston, my husband and I, we would solve the world in a pub, sitting down, having a beer, and as an HR person, tell him what to do, what not to do, what to say, and this and that. And he would give me his advice of how to manage the people that I worked with, and blah, 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 and this and that. So him and I, we worked in that was our dynamic. And then when we grew apart, it was because of a tragedy, but not because the tragedy itself was hard. It was, what made it hard was that we didn't want to show our feelings. That is different. How you handle your emotions has to be considered as well. And the reason why we grew apart was because I wanted to show him that I was a strong person, that I could handle the situation. About me when he would go to work, he was trying to show me the same thing, but then at the same time he was working, so his mind, he realized after 1 year of mourning and all of this stuff, we realized, hey, this is not working for us. Why are we pretending to be strong when we know that we have to do this together? And we came back together, right? So I think when you hear doctors ask the couples, so what brought you together? I think it's with that purpose, for you to remember how you came together so that you can do it again. Not because it's going to work, but at least to do some kind of variation, right? That will help you come together again.
Yeah.
And so I feel, for me, when it comes to a relationship, I think people freak out too much when they grow apart. There's stages. We just have to
There are
go.
stages, they're a process, and especially when you deal with any kind of tragedy or trauma or anything like that, everybody goes through stages in their own time. And so sometimes you just have to do this. There's actually a way that I kind of sometimes think about it, and I talk to my clients about it as well. We talk so much about balance, yeah? But I actually prefer to think about it not as balance, meaning if you had a pendulum, right? The pendulum would always sit in balance like that, and having found its balancing point. But I'm rather thinking about counterbalancing.
Okay.
Counterbalancing. So if something happens that kind of puts you out of balance a little bit, go there, deal with it. But then remember to counterbalance. right? And refocus on the things that work and that bring you back to hopefully something akin to the balancing point that keeps you in mostly in equilibrium, and that allows you enough self-care and peace in the world in order to function. But it's a thing that can always be in movement. So don't freak out too much if it's out of balance. You can deal with whatever it is you need to deal with, like let's say a really stressful project at work, deal with it, and then after the project is done, counterbalance, take some vacation, spend more time with your loved ones, and make up for it until you find again kind of more of your center point. So that also, to sit at balance always, it ain't really happening. I don't think reality quite works that way. And in terms of these commonalities that you talked about earlier, I think a very powerful tool to address that is gratitude. Always remember the things that even today that you have maybe grown apart a little bit, you're grateful for in your partner, right? Stuff about him that you love or once loved, if it has kind of fizzled out a little bit, but things that you're grateful for, things that you appreciate, common experiences, anecdotes you can draw on, and sometimes even external things are fun. You both love your pets, or if you have children, you're both connected through the children and things like that, because your relationship might not exactly be the same anymore. But that doesn't mean that it's not a rich, happy, fulfilling relationship. And it's just different as life changes one and changes the other, and we all get older and hopefully wiser. Yeah, relationships change too along the way, and not necessarily like getting better or getting worse, but just changing and becoming different. And so I just feel that the number one thing that I would like maybe people that listen here today to take away from this is that growing apart is a real thing. And as people grow, as one person grows or everybody grows, it's not the same. You're not the same. So don't expect to always remain the same. Yeah, you are going to grow apart, but that is not a death sentence necessarily for relationships that you have. Right. Again, like what we said before, some relationships are worth putting the effort in, and some are not. Yeah, some are going to, you changed so drastically, and the relationship might not have been that strong to begin with, and it would take so much effort to kludge together something that wasn't right from the beginning, maybe. Say you have to let it go. Do it graciously. Do it without burning bridges. Do it was more of a setting free kind of maybe mentality around it, and then move on. And so change is going to happen. Growing apart is going to happen. And I think that, again, the important thing is awareness and mindfulness of how this growth impacts you and your relationships around you. And that's especially true for abrupt change.
Yeah.
Abrupt change.
I think also for me, Claudia, it's about both people wanting to continue to grow together. Like you were saying before, when a partner wants to go and increase or increment or go and improve their understanding or knowledge of whatever it is that they want to improve, it's very important and necessary for the other partner to follow through the journey. that when the person wants to share something with you, that the other person is willing to sit down and listen. You might not understand a thing of what they're saying, but be there, be happy for their growth.
Interest.
Yes, yes. Another thing that my sister one day told me was that the way that it's very important for you to always admire in somehow, some way, your partner. There always has to be some kind of admiration that you see in your partner. Why? Because I don't know, hopefully it makes sense. It's part of growing apart or part of staying together. What I'm going to say, it might be a little bit questionable, but for me, it works. The way that I keep my love alive and the way that I feel that it works is when you feel that your partner, your relationship is not a sure thing. That this one day and never come back. And the way that I keep myself grounded is by understanding that my husband is a very smart person. I admire him, that the people around him admire him and come to me and tell me wonderful things about my husband. And it makes me feel proud. And that lets me know that even though I'm growing on this side, on my coaching, on my business and everything else, my husband is going to feel the same way about me, regardless of whether I have a business or not, because he might not be admiring me right now for that, but maybe he admires me as a person, for my mind, for whatever I do, for the people that I surround myself. That's also very important. So if you feel, or that something is missing, maybe it's good to remember once again, why did you fall in love with this person, and how? What was the situation? What did you admire of that person? And see if it's still there, right? Because that's what's going to hold that bond together. Make sure that you're together, keeping one step together, and so on and so on. I believe that that's what I've seen in a lot of people, because even now, I wish a lot of people could see how I see, for example, my in-laws. I see my mother-in-law, see my in-law, my father-in-law, and they still look at each other like they had just met. Okay. Why? Because I know that when I tell her, so what made you fall in love with your husband? And she tells me, oh my God, he's such a smart man. Because that's going to keep you still in that surprise moment. Like, you still have not figured out this person. Why do you want to figure them out? Always keep yourself surprised. So part of growing together is keeping that curiosity, and that, like you say, be mindful of what you have, be grateful of what you have. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. There's absolutely. There's just some things that occurred to me as I was listening to it, and I tried to reflect back how this might be, in my relationship. The thing is that, see, these traits of your partner that you fundamentally loved at the beginning, they remember them and be aware of them, even if maybe something happens and they are not necessarily apparent right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of me being sick. I have a co-coach I'm working with where the husband goes through a little bit of issues and things like that. So, there might be moments in life where maybe they might not appear that smart, because God knows, maybe they have they are taking medication that leaves them muddled or whatever. So, and some of these things can go on for quite a while, but nevertheless, remember that that person is still there.
Exactly.
And if you do, even if they're struggling, you're still going to see glimpses of that person that's underneath. Right. And then, just support and, a dose of good luck and some healing and things like that, hopefully are going to let that person come out the other end and bloom again into the person that maybe exhibits those traits more readily. And I think that just awareness, and sorry if I come always back to the same words, but it is really that it's being mindful and aware of what's happening, and what the criteria are that attracted you to that person, and not criteria, but the
Attribute.
the attributes, yes, thank you. The attributes of that person that attracted you in the beginning. And, then also compromise from time to time. Not everybody can be at their best all the time. And I feel that so often in couples that do get divorced and things like that, the towel gets thrown in way too quickly, rather than allowing for this counterbalancing to even happen. Yeah, things go out of whack a little bit, and then it's immediately like, let's cut the string and that's it. Rather than allowing people to recenter and then counterbalance and make things all right again. But again, it's a case-by-case thing. I do not want to pass judgment here. It's just in my experience, I have seen that stuff like that can take time. And so, sometimes it's worthwhile remembering the good times, trusting that that person is still there somewhere, and, then giving it a little bit of time and support. Yeah, so much to think about here.
Let me tell you, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Let me tell you something. A relationship is not just having a relationship with your partner. We're talking a relationship with friends, talking a relationship with your boss. I mean, let's be honest. Why do people stay, with a boss? Sometimes it's because you admire your boss for even maybe the same things that you admire your husband, obviously with the with the limits, right? But you can admire boss because you can say he's fair, he's just, he listens, he helps me work when I don't have this, or he offers me options, positions that I would love to take sometime, or whatever. You can admire people in every aspect. Just remember that everything that you have, everybody that you are surrounded by, it's a relationship. You might admire your friends because maybe your friend is always this person that you can talk with and you understand each other. You like that, or because a person likes to read and they give you advice about certain books and so on. The point is, it's the same with anybody that is around you, right? And so I think that if we were to remember that the same way that you treat your relationship, your intimate relationships, you can see your relationship at work and with your friends, you might have a better relationship with the world. That's how I see it. Yeah. What do you think?
Yes, all the relationships have some fundamentals that are the commonalities that were built, the attractions, the preferences, and things like that. And it's good to remember them in case where maybe distance or life events or whatever pull you apart for the time being, and allow then for things to settle a little bit. And that is true too. I mean, the person might change in certain aspects. If we come back to this growth idea, right? But that, even fundamental growth does not necessarily change all aspects. So try to remember the ones that are still there, and see if you can come to love the new aspects as well, the ones that have grown. And, and then take it a little bit in stride. And, most changes would hopefully be for the good. And if we talk about growth, right, growth, desirable growth. So hopefully you will then have enough of a relationship that you can support that and celebrate it. Remember, this is the FreudenFreude channel, right? So let's be all freudig for all the happy things that are happening for others and the growth that they experience. Let's celebrate that and support them in that. And then hopefully you become in small part of that growth and understanding that growth, even though it might not be something that you do, but something that you can support and walk along this person at least enough to maintain this relationship, rather than just looking at your own navel dust and saying, well, but this is how I am, and this is going to change, and you left me and you abandoned me, and things like that. Right? It's a matter of intent very often.
Yes, correct. I think for this to, let's say, if I was to say another word, it's also accountability, right? Like you were saying in a certain part of the conversation initially, you say that sometimes there's people that grow together and then suddenly you find yourself growing apart, and there's no coming back from that, right? I think that a lot of people notice that they're here and that their partners stay behind. I do see a lot of people nowadays trying to recover, right? Trying to come back and say, well, how can I tell my spouse that I am growing, but they have stayed apart, but I want them to be with me in the journey. And for me, it's always been, well, there has to be an accountability here to say, look, I feel that I've grown, but I feel that you are for some reason staying behind. Let's talk about this, right? And let's see what is going on. What are they feeling? Because we usually forget to ask our partners, our coworkers, our boss, what's going on in the relationship? Why do I feel that I am staying behind? Because it can also be that you're staying behind while others are advancing. What's the problem there, right? And because we're not taught to speak,
and
we don't ask the question, right, to say, how can we come back together? What's going on?
And see, like, even maybe if we just look at language, and even the words that you just said, you stayed back or he stayed back, there's judgment in that. There's judgment in that, because it's like, back there is a bad place to be. Just because now you have grown, back there, without this change, you're kind of lesser or whatever. There's judgment in there. And, people are entitled not to change. And that doesn't make them less, okay? It makes them different. There might be a gap, but it's not, he or she might grow differently, and there's an even bigger gap. But let's try to not say that once we grow, we even remotely consider us necessarily better, or that they are back there and not changing. And that they should be changing and following us along. And, don't bring good or bad in that, right? Because they're entitled not to change. And you, as entitled, you are to change.
But you do have the right to understand why. And that was my point, to say, okay, what's going on? Let's talk about it. Because like you say, it's not about passing judgment, but it's to understand what's going on And if the person says, no, I'm fine, I feel that we're going, that we're together, that we're fine, then you have to check yourself to say, well, then what's going on, right? But the point here is to ask what's going on, because a lot of people don't.
Yeah, to address it, to see that the relationship has maybe changed a little. And again, not only spouses, but in general, that stuff is changing. The dynamic is slightly changing and things like that. And, just to be aware of it. And if it requires it to, that you talk about it, that you address it. And, again, but let's be mindful of not saying I'm better because I had certain realizations,
Exactly.
because I had
not about that.
Certain change. It's not about being better. It's not about the other people being less. It's about just being different. I really hope that people start using the word different more than better and worse and things like that. And it might be very interesting, and it might be an opportunity to feel grounded in this previous commonality or whatever, so always look at the positive in any kind of situation, because maybe it's not all bad that other person didn't change.
Exactly.
And so I think that there's a lot of factors that can pull into it. But in any case, if the listener here works with a coach, and change maybe that they're experiencing as part of the coaching, any competent coach would also address the ecologies of this change and how it affects the systems around the coachee. And because I'm sure you do that as well, right?
Yeah. I also would like to also include, and it just popped in my mind because I was thinking about a case. I was thinking about how sometimes we don't exercise our right to put limits, right? To cut things, just to say, no, these are my boundaries, right? Because I believe that also a lot of the reasons why people grow, right? Not so much, but in certain aspects, it's because there are no boundaries, because you don't set them from the beginning. And for example, if you were to tell your spouse, I will not let you do this, or I feel that it's inappropriate that you do this or this or this, and you listen, what's going to happen the day of tomorrow that you grow, that you're feeling, other different, you no longer think like this person, you're no longer in agreement with your spouse. What's going to happen the day that you decide, well, you know what, now I want to do it because now I have these reasons that I want to do this? Well, guess what? Because you allowed your spouse, your partner, your coworker, your boss to tell you how to manage it, now you have to find yourself excusing or giving reasons as to why you want to do certain things. Whereas you should have done since the very beginning to say, no, this is how I do things, right? This is how I want things, or I need things to be done. This fits better in a marriage than it would be with your boss, right? But at least with your boss, you would say, hey, look, it has worked this way for me. Would it be okay that I try it this way? If not, let's try it your way and we'll see which one works better, right? There's compromise there. But I feel that in your personal life, there has to be boundaries. You have to set those boundaries so that you don't grow apart in certain aspects, let's say financially. Okay, let's talk financially. That if your partner tells you you cannot spend money, let's say in dry cleaners, okay? Dry cleaners. And then in 5 years from now, you're going to start working and you're going to be busy and you have the children. Well, you're not going to have time to be, laundering and ironing and doing all these stuff. Well, now you want to take stuff to the dry cleaners. And guess what? your husband is going to say, well, no, I already told you that we're not going to spend money on that. There's boundaries. There's a reason now. You can say, well, you know what? Now I'm working, I'm doing all of this, let's do this compromise where we can work together on this because, hey, I need help, right? So I feel that there's areas where people grow apart, not necessarily as a life. When you grow separate as a life, I think it's because it's been an accumulation of a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that, certain decisions are much more impactful than using the dry cleaner or not, even though I understand the example. It's I talked to a gentleman, and he got really, really into spiritual stuff. And he was this close to quitting his job, leaving his family, and going into his monastery or something like that, meditating for hours on the mountain. And so, what's the impact on that? And yes, that might be your newfound change and what you consider growth, and it's all happy and it's what you really want to do. But just be aware that, certain things, have really huge impact on all those around you, and that there's consequences to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, it's an extremely drastic example, but, sometimes you have to know that you're not in all areas of your life alone on your journey. You have made commitments to others, and you cannot necessarily change at the detriment of all of that. And, certain change might need renegotiating agreements that you have with people that accompany you throughout your life. And then it's just, let's be adults about it. Let's be adults about it and talk and consider it and come to agreements. And, hopefully everybody in the end gets to do what is most beneficial or agreeable to them at that moment. So I think that we touched on so many things here. I didn't think we would actually fill an hour, which we did.
Wow. Yes.
It's just always interesting. I know we went a little bit off topic when we talked about maybe spousal relationships and things like that. But nevertheless, I hope that there were some tidbits in here that were interesting for those that were listening to us have this chat. And do you have something to add, Sandra, or shall we wrap it up?
I think just to end this again, I think the focus is, even though we talked about spouses, I think it's because it's the closest relationship we have experience with, right? It's the biggest and most intimate thing that you have. And if you cannot be in good shape in that important relationship in your life, most probably everything else is also crumbling around you, right? So, or you might have an amazing relationship with everybody outside and you're not practicing at home. So just something to think about.
Yeah. It's it can be a big can of worms, but keep the fundamentals straight, and the fundamentals are not rocket science. Like, be aware, put in effort to maintain and nurture relationships as you go through the change, and if you need to get help. That's what also coaches are there for.
Reach out to a coach.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Sandra. And, for everybody else, we hope that you have some content here that resonated with you. Show us some love, subscribe to the channel, give us a like or a comment or something like that. And we would certainly appreciate it if you would join us again next week, or watch any of the recordings on our channel in the future. Thank you so much. Until next week.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, everybody. Bye.